My husband announced he was leaving me at our daughter's graduation. But he started screaming when I turned around and revealed the truth I'd been hiding from him for months. Hold on a moment while I tell you everything, because what happened that day changed my life completely, and you won't believe how it all unfolded. I remember that day like it was yesterday. The sun was shining, Zarya had just walked across the stage, and I felt proud, even emotional. 18 years of marriage had brought us here, or so I thought. Douglas, my husband, looked as charming as ever, smiling at our daughter as if nothing was wrong. But as soon as the ceremony ended, he grabbed my arm and led me toward the parking lot. His tone was sharp, cold, almost rehearsed. "Amma, I'm leaving," he said. "I can't do this anymore. I want the house, I want half of your retirement, and I'm moving on." I stared at him, my heart racing, but my face stayed calm. There was something strange about the way he said it, so confident, so sure of himself, as if he already won. That was when I whispered softly, "Douglas, you might want to step closer." He laughed, a smug, dismissive laugh, thinking I was panicking or about to beg. He didn't know I had spent months preparing for this moment. He didn't know that while he was lying and cheating, I had been quietly watching, gathering evidence, making sure I had all the facts I needed. I had seen the signs, receipts that didn't make sense, little changes in his routine, new cologne, and excuses about late shifts. I had noticed the subtle financial discrepancies in our accounts, the way he was slowly trying to separate us, financially and emotionally. But I had also planned my response. I wasn't going to cry or beg. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. I had taken control quietly, making sure I had everything I needed to protect myself and Zarya. Douglas had underestimated me. He thought his charm and confidence would scare me into submission, but I had learned over 18 years not to rely on appearances alone. As he smirked, expecting tears, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I knew the truth I held could destroy him, and I was ready. He had no idea that the woman he thought he could walk away from was already 10 steps ahead. And in that parking lot, as the cars hummed around us and Zarya's laughter from across the lot faded, I realized this was the moment everything would change. For him, for me, and for our daughter. Douglas was about to find out just how wrong he was, and I was ready to make sure he would never forget it. For months before that shocking graduation day, I noticed Douglas slowly pulling away. He started claiming long overtime shifts at work, coming home later than usual, and making excuses for every dinner I tried to plan. At first, I told myself it was just stress, that maybe he was tired or overworked. But then the little things started adding up, things that didn't make sense if he was being honest. Receipts would appear in places they shouldn't, charges I didn't recognize on our joint accounts. I noticed new cologne that didn't smell like him, his grooming changing subtly, and even his clothes started having faint marks or unfamiliar laundry tags. None of these were huge on their own, but together, they painted a picture I couldn't ignore. I began to suspect there was more going on than just work stress. Counseling sessions, which I had hoped would help us reconnect, became another place where he distanced himself. Douglas would cancel appointments, claim he had to work, or make excuses for why he couldn't talk seriously about our marriage. Sometimes he showed up, but he would refuse to engage fully, brushing off questions I asked. It felt like he was deliberately sabotaging our efforts, and it hurt, but I refused to confront him blindly. I needed proof, something concrete, because I wasn't about to make accusations I couldn't back up. So I started investigating quietly. I began keeping track of his schedule, noting inconsistencies, and cross-checking them with charges and messages that didn't match his stories. I checked our joint accounts regularly, looking for any suspicious withdrawals or transfers. Every little inconsistency felt like a piece of a puzzle, and the more I watched, the more the picture became clearer. It wasn't just about emotional betrayal anymore. I realized there were financial inconsistencies too. Funds missing, unexplained charges, and transfers that seemed suspicious. It made me angry, not in a sudden outburst, but in a slow-burning way that demanded careful planning. Douglas was trying to manipulate our finances quietly, and I couldn't let that happen without knowing exactly what he was doing. I promised myself I wouldn't fall apart. I wouldn't cry or beg. I would be calm, careful, and deliberate. I would gather every scrap of evidence, every receipt, every account statement, every lie he tried to hide, and I would get the answers I needed. It became my mission to protect myself and our daughter, Zarya, and to make sure that if Douglas was betraying me, he would not get away with it. This quiet, careful watching gave me strength. Every small lie he told, Every small change he thought I wouldn't notice only fueled my determination. I was no longer just a wife blindsided by her husband's actions. I was someone who would uncover the truth and face it with clarity. And in that preparation, I started to feel a sense of power I hadn't realized I had, knowing that when the time came, I would act, and act on my terms. It hit me like a punch to the chest the day I finally found out. Douglas wasn't just distant or lying about overtime, he was cheating. His name on a text thread, messages full of flirtation and secret plans, confirmed everything I had feared. Soleil Hardwick, a young fitness instructor barely in her 30s, had been sneaking into our lives, weaving herself between Douglas and our marriage. I felt a mix of shock, anger, and a strange sense of calm, the kind that comes when you know you need to act, but not yet. I didn't confront him immediately. I couldn't. I needed a plan, and I needed proof. My emotions were strong, yes, but I had learned over the years that reacting too soon would ruin any chance of control. I spent hours looking through accounts, receipts, and messages, carefully piecing together the pattern. That's when I discovered something else. He was moving money. Transfers from our joint accounts into private ones I had never authorized. The realization hit me. This wasn't just betrayal of the heart. It was financial betrayal, and he was planning to leave me with nothing. I needed advice, and I knew exactly who to call. Nkechi Lyons, an attorney I trusted, listened patiently as I explained what I had found. She didn't sugarcoat it. "Amma, he's preparing to corner you financially before he even files for divorce," she said. "He wants to take the house, the savings, and maybe even Zaria if he can manipulate the court." Hearing it aloud made the danger tangible. This wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a full-scale plan to strip me of everything I had worked for, everything I had built. The shock of the affair mixed with the calculated coldness of his financial moves made my blood run cold. I realized Douglas wanted a clean escape, a life with Soleil, our money, our house, and possibly even control over our daughter. And he thought I wouldn't notice. But I did. I noticed every detail, every secret, every transfer. I cataloged them all methodically, keeping records and notes that would serve me later. Even as I felt anger and hurt, I also felt clarity. Douglas had underestimated me, as he always had, assuming that emotional outbursts or fear would dictate my actions. Instead, I started planning silently, building my case, and securing evidence. Each message, each bank statement, each clue strengthened my resolve. I wasn't going to be blindsided anymore. I wasn't going to be the woman who lost everything while Douglas walked away smiling. In that moment, as the weight of betrayal pressed down, I understood something fundamental. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about survival, about protecting Zaria, and about reclaiming the life Douglas thought he could dismantle. I wouldn't act recklessly. I would act strategically, with patience and precision. And when the time came, he would see exactly what he had underestimated all along. Sitting alone in the quiet of our living room, I felt a strange mix of anger and clarity. Douglas had always underestimated me, assuming that my calm demeanor and professional career as a nurse meant I would be easily manipulated, emotionally soft, or blindly trusting. He didn't realize that intelligence isn't just about degrees or knowledge. It's about observation, strategy, and patience. And that's exactly what I had. I knew I wanted revenge, but not the kind that would leave me in trouble or regret. This had to be calculated, legal, and deeply effective. My goal wasn't violence or public humiliation. It was to expose the truth and protect everything I had built, emotionally and financially, while making Douglas face the consequences of his betrayal. I started by going over every detail I had gathered so far. Bank statements, receipts, messages, appointments, everything was organized and cataloged. I tracked his financial transactions meticulously, noting every transfer and withdrawal, every expense that didn't make sense. I even reached out quietly to people who might provide corroboration, friends, neighbors, and colleagues who had witnessed things Douglas assumed were private. It was during this process that I uncovered another shock. Douglas had co-signed a lease for an apartment with Soleil, and they had put down deposits for furniture, all using our shared funds. Every dollar had been siphoned without my knowledge. It was infuriating, but also a gift in a way. Now I had concrete proof of not just the emotional betrayal, but the financial manipulation as well. I began making copies, taking screenshots, printing every receipt I could find. Every detail mattered, and nothing could be left to chance. Following Nkechi's advice, I quietly began moving my personal assets into a protected trust. This would safeguard our home, my savings, and anything Douglas might try to claim unfairly. It felt empowering, taking control of the situation while he still thought he had the upper hand. The calm determination I felt surprised me. I realized that this was not just about punishing him, but reclaiming my sense of security and autonomy. With evidence compiled and assets protected, I began sketching out a plan. I didn't just want to confront Douglas. I wanted to do it on my terms, at my timing, when the impact would be undeniable. I imagined the moment of revelation, how every lie, every secret, and every betrayal would be exposed in a way he couldn't dismiss or manipulate. This wasn't about vengeance for the sake of anger. It was about justice, precision, and demonstrating that underestimating me had been his greatest mistake. As I sat there, alone but resolute, I realized something profound. The next steps would be mine to control. Douglas had initiated chaos, but I would finish it. I wasn't afraid, and I wasn't desperate. I was prepared. And when the time came, he would see that all his planning, all his arrogance, had only set the stage for his own downfall. I smiled quietly to myself, knowing that everything I needed was within my reach, and that the moment I had been preparing for was closer than he could ever imagine. Graduation day arrived, and I moved carefully, like a conductor orchestrating a symphony. I had invited Douglas's parents, Calvin and Marvette Trent, knowing they adored me and trusted that I would never deceive their son. They had no idea about the secret life Douglas had been leading, and I intended to keep it that way, at least for now. Their presence would amplify the impact of what was about to unfold, and I wanted every detail to be perfect. I made sure Nkechi, my attorney, was on standby, just a call away. Every possible scenario had been considered. I couldn't afford mistakes, not now when everything I had worked for was on the line. I dressed carefully, in a way that was elegant but understated, composed but confident. Douglas had always believed he knew how I would react under pressure. He thought I would crumble, that he could scare me with threats and ultimatums. But today, I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Zarya noticed the tension, of course. She glanced between her parents, sensing something was off, but she was focused on her ceremony. I allowed myself a small smile at her resilience. My daughter's focus reminded me why I was doing all of this. Not just for me, but to protect her from the chaos Douglas had been trying to drag into our lives. Before leaving the house, I prepared a folder carefully. It contained financial statements showing Douglas's secret transfers, proof of his affair with Soleil, and copies of the legal filings Nkechi had drafted and was ready to submit. Every detail had been checked twice, every document in order. I knew the moment of confrontation had to be precise. I needed him to realize, without a doubt, that he had underestimated me completely. As we drove to the venue, I remained composed, speaking softly to Zarya about her achievement, masking the storm of emotions and plans swirling inside me. Douglas, oblivious to my knowledge, tried to act casual, but I could sense the arrogance in his posture, the smug confidence of a man who thinks he has already won. Little did he know, every move he had made had been meticulously documented, and the moment he stepped into that parking lot, his entire plan would collapse. I watched him carefully, noting every flicker of impatience, every subtle attempt to control the moment. My calmness unnerved him in ways I could see, but that he wouldn't admit. He had expected begging, tears, pleading, anything that would show weakness. Instead, he was met with quiet confidence, with the poise of someone who had already anticipated every betrayal, every lie, and every attempt to undermine her. Everything was in place. The evidence, the witnesses, the legal backup, and my own resolve. I had rehearsed the moment over and over in my mind, imagining his shock, his panic, and the realization that the woman he had tried to manipulate was now the one in control. Today wasn't just graduation day for Zarya. It would also be a turning point for me. The day I reclaimed my life and showed Douglas that underestimating me had been his gravest mistake. As soon as the last applause faded and guests began drifting toward their cars, Douglas grabbed my arm and practically dragged me to the parking lot. His movements were sharp, purposeful, and full of arrogance, as if he had rehearsed this moment countless times. He refused to wait until we were home. He wanted an audience, even if it was just the empty parking lot and the few lingering parents. He stopped in front of me, chest out, voice loud and deliberate. "Alma," he began, as though announcing a final decree. "I'm leaving. I want the house. I want half of your retirement. I'm moving on with my life." He expected me to crumble, to beg, to plead. He expected the tears, the heartbreak, the spectacle that would feed his ego. I watched him carefully, taking in every twitch, every forced pause, every exaggerated gesture. Inwardly, I felt a strange mix of pity and calm. Douglas had painted himself as the dominant one in our marriage, the man in control, and now he was giving me the gift of showing his true colors. I stayed silent, letting him ramble, letting him think he had already won. There was no pleading from me. No tears. No desperate attempt to salvage something that he had already chosen to destroy. His voice rose as he continued, each word designed to assert his power, to humiliate me in front of whoever might still be lingering around. You can't stop me. You know you can't. I've made my decision. You'll get nothing but what you deserve. He believed his aggression would frighten me, that the sheer force of his declarations would make me collapse. But I didn't. I stayed quiet, watching, almost studying him. Every outburst, every demand, every smug smile only made my resolve stronger. Douglas was revealing the very weaknesses that I had been waiting to expose. I could see the tension building in his shoulders, the slight falter in his bravado, the tiny cracks that he assumed no one would notice. My silence unnerved him. I could see it in the way his eyes flickered, in the way his fists clenched slightly at his sides. He had expected a reaction, some sign of despair or fear, and instead he got composure. My calmness was a mirror showing him exactly what he had underestimated for years, me. As he continued to speak, trying desperately to maintain control, I remained still, letting him exhaust himself. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I simply observed, collected, and waited for the moment when his performance would backfire completely. Douglas thought he was demonstrating power, but in reality, he was planting the seeds of his own undoing. In that empty parking lot, with the echoes of the graduation ceremony fading behind us, I realized that true power wasn't loud speeches or dramatic gestures. It was patience, it was control, it was the quiet certainty that comes from knowing the truth and waiting for the right moment to strike. Douglas had no idea that I was already several steps ahead, and my silence was about to become his greatest fear. I reached into my bag and pulled out a plain, manila envelope. My hands were steady, my expression calm, almost serene. Douglas, still red-faced and frustrated from his attempt to dominate the moment, froze when I held it out. "Here," I said quietly, "this is for you." He looked at me, confused, thinking it was some kind of empty threat or bluff. But I could see a flicker of doubt in his eyes as he took the envelope and tore it open. Inside were neatly organized printouts. Every one of his secret accounts, transfers he thought I'd never notice, the apartment lease he had co-signed with Soleil, and receipts for furniture deposits taken from our joint funds. Bank statements clearly showed the funds he had siphoned off, hidden away, and planned to use as leverage against me. Douglas's confident facade crumbled as he skimmed through the papers. I watched him go pale, feeling a small, quiet satisfaction. Every line, every figure, every document confirmed what I had suspected and what I had spent months gathering. For the first time, I could see fear replace arrogance in his eyes. He realized, in that moment, that he had underestimated me completely. I leaned in slightly, keeping my voice calm and precise. "Douglas," I said, "I filed before you did." The words hit harder than any scream or accusation could have. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, as if he were struggling to find something to say. I could see the panic rising in him, the sudden understanding that the ground beneath his carefully constructed lies was collapsing. He tried to lash out verbally, shouting and gesturing wildly, but it only drew attention to the scene. From the distance, I could hear footsteps approaching. Calvin and Marvette Trent, his parents, were walking quickly toward us, alarmed by the commotion. Douglas's attempt at asserting power had not only failed, but had created an audience. His anger, his panic, and his desperation were all on display, and there was nothing he could do to regain control. I stayed composed, never raising my voice, never letting my hands tremble. Every movement was deliberate, every expression controlled. Douglas tried to interrupt, tried to grab the papers, but I stepped back just enough to keep him from seizing them. He realized too late that his tantrum was futile. In that moment, I felt a sense of empowerment I hadn't known in years. The envelope wasn't just paper and ink. It was proof, strategy, and leverage. It was the culmination of patience, careful observation, and calculated planning. Douglas had believed he could humiliate me, dominate me, and walk away unscathed, but all of that had ended in the quietest, most controlled way possible. He was shouting now, red-faced and desperate, while I remained calm, letting the truth speak louder than his anger ever could. This was only the first layer of what I had prepared, but it was enough to make him understand that for the first time, the game had changed, and I was the one holding all the cards. Calvin and Marvette arrived just in time to see the tension boiling over. Their eyes widened as they took in Douglas's flustered, red-faced expression, and they immediately demanded an explanation from their son. "Douglas, what's going on here?" Calvin's voice was sharp, full of authority and disbelief. Marvette's hands were on her hips, a mix of concern and confusion painted across her face. Douglas stumbled over his words, trying to explain, but nothing he said made sense. That's when I stepped forward calmly and handed them the envelope. "Everything you need to know is in here," I said softly, but with enough firmness that there was no doubt I meant it. He froze, realizing that this wasn't something he could twist or dismiss. Panic overtook him almost immediately. In a desperate attempt to regain control, Douglas grabbed my arm. "Amma, please. Don't ruin everything. We can fix this." His voice cracked as fear replaced arrogance. I gently stepped back, pulling out my phone from my bag, and casually revealed that I had recorded his confession just moments earlier. The very words he had used to justify his plans, his lies, and his betrayal. Douglas's face went pale, and then red, and then white in rapid succession. He started screaming, a high-pitched, frantic sound of pure panic. His confident, smug demeanor was gone, replaced by a man realizing too late that he had lost every advantage. Every document I had, every record, every carefully compiled piece of evidence outweighed anything he could claim or argue. The panic in his voice was loud enough to echo across the parking lot. Calvin and Marvette's expressions shifted from confusion to shock, then to anger. They took the papers from me and began scanning the contents, seeing for themselves the betrayal and financial misconduct Douglas had been hiding. Marvette's eyes welled up and Calvin's jaw tightened, but there was no turning away from the truth in front of them. Douglas's desperate shouting only amplified the impact, making his deception clear to everyone present. At that moment, a car pulled up, and Soleil appeared, looking startled as she saw the chaotic scene unfolding. She tried to drive away quickly, hoping to escape unnoticed, but my attorney, Nkechi, had already noted her presence and details. Her name, vehicle, and timing were all documented for future claims regarding the financial and marital misconduct. Soleil froze, realizing she couldn't simply vanish from the consequences that were coming. Douglas's screaming grew louder, but no one paid him the attention he craved. He was surrounded by undeniable evidence, witnesses who now knew the truth, and a wife who had orchestrated this revelation with precision. Every lie, every hidden account, every secret meeting was now laid bare. As he continued shouting, I remained composed, standing slightly apart with Zarya at my side. The panic, the chaos, the unraveling, it all felt strangely satisfying. Douglas had thought he could control the narrative, humiliate me, and walk away unscathed, but in mere moments, everything he relied on had collapsed. He was exposed, powerless, and screaming into a truth he could no longer escape. The moment was complete, and I watched with quiet certainty, knowing justice had finally found its way. The days after the graduation chaos felt surreal. Douglas was still reeling from the public exposure, and I was already steps ahead, calmly handling what needed to happen next. I had instructed Nkechi to file for divorce immediately, including clear claims of financial misconduct and breach of trust. Douglas hadn't anticipated this. He thought he could maneuver slowly, manipulate me, and leave with his plans intact. Instead, the paperwork hit him like a wall he couldn't climb. When he realized the legal filings were in motion, panic and disbelief flooded his face. The documents outlined every transfer, every secret account, every misuse of marital funds. More importantly, they included evidence of his affair and his attempts to hide assets. The reality of his actions finally landed. He was no longer in control. He attempted to negotiate, to argue, even to beg, but Nkechi had anticipated every excuse, every claim he could possibly make. One of the first victories was securing the house. Because Douglas had breached marital trust by misappropriating funds and planning to abandon the family, I was able to legally protect our home under my name. It was no small relief, knowing that Zarya and I would have stability while he faced the consequences of his actions. The house became more than just property. It was a symbol of security and triumph over the chaos he had tried to impose. The next step was custody. Douglas had voluntarily abandoned the family in pursuit of his affair, proving himself unreliable and unfit to make decisions for Zarya. The court saw the evidence clearly, and I was granted primary custody. My daughter would remain in a safe, loving environment, while Douglas struggled to regain even a fraction of the life he had taken for granted. For Zaria, it was a relief, though she still processed the shock of seeing her father's choices laid bare. Douglas's affair with Soleil crumbled as quickly as it had begun. Soleil, seeing his financial ruin and the legal exposure he faced, ended the relationship abruptly. The man she had been secretly involved with no longer had charm, money, or credibility. It was almost poetic justice. Douglas had planned an escape with her, but the very foundation of that plan was demolished by his own greed and lies. In the weeks that followed, Douglas tried to apologize repeatedly. He left messages, called, and even appeared at our home uninvited, claiming remorse and asking for forgiveness. Each time, I remained firm. There was no room for his half-hearted apologies or attempts to manipulate my emotions. I had learned through every betrayal, every lie, that forgiveness didn't mean giving him access to my life again. Meanwhile, I began rebuilding. Slowly, deliberately, I reclaimed control over my time, my finances, and my emotional well-being. I reconnected with friends, focused on work, and spent quality time with Zaria. Douglas, once the center of my world, was now a cautionary tale of arrogance and betrayal, unraveling under the weight of his own choices. As I moved forward, I realized that reclaiming my life wasn't about revenge. It was about creating a secure, peaceful, and empowered existence for me and my daughter. And for the first time in months, I felt fully in control. The final mediation felt surprisingly calm, almost anticlimactic, after months of tension, planning, and revelations. Douglas sat across from me, papers scattered between us, his face a mixture of frustration, exhaustion, and something close to desperation. He looked like a man who had lost more than he ever imagined he could. The court-appointed mediator waited patiently, allowing each side to speak, but I had already made my mind up. I wasn't here to fight for more than what was rightfully mine. I was here to finalize what had already been carefully arranged. I asked for nothing beyond what the law guaranteed me. The house remained under my name, the savings I had protected were secure, and custody of Zaria was unquestioned. Every document, every filing, every precaution I had taken over the previous months now ensured that my family was safe, and Douglas's attempts to manipulate or intimidate me were powerless. The mediator nodded as I presented my case calmly, clearly, and without emotional outbursts. It was precise, professional, and unshakable. The exact approach that had guided me from the moment I discovered his betrayal. Douglas, sitting across the table, shifted nervously. His voice, once loud and commanding, had dwindled to pleading. "Amma, please. I can fix this. I can make it right. Let's start over," he begged, eyes desperate and unconvincing. I could see him grasping at straws, trying to salvage something from the wreckage he had caused. But I remained steady, unmoved by his words, unmoved by the regret he was finally showing. "You ended this at our daughter's graduation," I said firmly, my tone calm but unwavering. "I'm just finishing what you started." The words hung in the air, cutting through his pleas. It was simple, direct, and true. He had set the stage with his choices, and now he would face the consequences fully, without any chance to rewrite the past. The mediator finalized the documents, and the signatures were collected. Everything was legally binding, and Douglas had no room to maneuver. He slumped back in his chair, defeated, while I stayed upright, composed, and completely in control. The sense of closure was profound, not loud or dramatic, but measured, deliberate, and empowering. I stood, gathered Zaria's hand, and walked toward the exit. Each step felt deliberate, a physical manifestation of reclaiming my life and leaving the chaos behind. Douglas remained seated, watching us leave, unable to follow, powerless to stop the life he had tried to steal. Outside, the sunlight hit my face, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with weather. It was the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had handled every betrayal, every deception, and every attempt at control with dignity. Walking away with Zaria, I realized that this ending wasn't about triumphant revenge or dramatic declarations. It was about calm determination, resilience, and reclaiming peace. I had rebuilt my life on my terms, grounded in clarity and strength, free from fear or manipulation. And as we walked into the world together, I felt a profound sense of freedom and certainty. This was the life we deserved, and nothing could take it from us. Do you think Amma handled everything the right way by standing her ground and protecting her family? Or should she have given Douglas another chance? Share your thoughts in the comments. I really want to hear what you think. And if you love stories like this, Make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new one.